Welcome to the newly installed Colts Brawl podcast. I am your host, Michael Terrazas, formerly known from the Underdog Sports podcast, who have transitioned over to this podcast. My buddy, my friend, Cody Felger, my partner in crime. Introduce yourself, buddy.
Hey, it's good to be here, man. Man, I'm ready to talk Colts. I'm ready for a new chapter, and it's such a cool name, Colts Brawl. I don't even really know what it means, but it sounds cool, man. And I'm ready to talk Colts, and I know that we both are big fans of them, so hopefully we can bring a lot of knowledge and insight.
Yeah, man. I was I didn't really get it, like Colts Brawl. I was like, okay, it's catchy though. It's catchy. It's definitely better than the name I came up with for mine. But man, excited to get on this podcast with you, man. I've followed you for about a few months now, because I've only started for about 8 months. But man, you're really insightful, and I couldn't think of anyone better to partner up with.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Man, I thought that, this podcast is obviously the pilot podcast, so it's the first one we're doing for this network. And so I thought it'd be super awesome if we could just kind of introduce ourselves, and I'll let you go first. Kind of introduce ourselves, how we became a Colts fan, what we hope to do with this podcast, and just kind of make this one personal. Not really get into much Colts content in this one, but I'm sure, it's going to be a weekly podcast, so we bring in a lot more content in the future. So, man, why don't you introduce yourself, kind of tell the folks listening who you are, and, man, what you hope to get out of this podcast.
All right. Well, my name is Michael Terrazas. I am 21 years old. I know a lot of people are saying, man, this guy is young. But, man, don't make no mistake about it. I love me some Colts football. I have followed them for a very long time. It's pretty interesting how I became a Colts fan, because I was a little kid. I didn't really know what football was. So my bigger brother, he was watching SportsCenter. Of course, I was the little brother, always, nagging him and everything. He was watching SportsCenter. I ran into his room, sat down, and watched it with him, and he just so happened to be watching highlights of one Peyton Manning. And I go, hey, man, who's that? And he says, that's Peyton Manning. And I'm just like, oh, man, I like Peyton Manning. And from then on, if there was any possible way that I could watch Peyton Manning, I would. And when I first got my first phone, I started looking up sports apps. I started looking online. I started keeping track of scores every Sunday. And, man, from the late Peyton Manning years, the Andrew Luck era, and into this era, man, it's been a lot. It's been a emotional roller coaster, if you might say. But it's been a grind. It's been a real grind. One Super Bowl as a Colts fan. So that's really how I became a fan. Now, when it comes to this podcast, man, I want to do things that a lot of people don't expect us to do, man. I want to, because I got big dreams to do this, and I want to do a lot of things. Hopefully, some ideas I've been thinking about the past few days, possibly go to a training camp, possibly go to a game. I don't live in Indianapolis or Indiana, but I would be 100% down to make the trip and just give our fans the best content possible. That's the number one thing, giving the fans the most constant content, reliable content, and I can't think of any two guys better to bring it to them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess a little bit about me. So don't feel young. I'm only a couple years older, 23, maybe 24 here in a couple months. But I'm trying to think. My first memory of the Colts was honestly probably, I remember this. Sitting in my family's living room. There was a TV on, and they were watching the AFC Championship game, Colts versus Patriots, 2006. That was my first like memory. Like I heard of the Colts before then. That was my first memory of watching. I remember watching Marlon Jackson interception, slide down, Colts win, go to the Super Bowl. I remember the Super Bowl. Remember I was over at my grandpa's house. Remember exactly what was happening, and it was an incredible thing. And then from there through starting 2007 season all the way now to 2020 season coming up. Been a Colts fan ever since. I definitely have grown a lot in my knowledge. I
Awesome.
remember, I remember. I'm trying to think now. I used to when I was like in high school. I would go get those, like those insider books at like Walmart or something. They had like all the insight for all the first. And I just could like read those things, front to back, cover to cover, and I was just so intrigued by that, and so intrigued about analysis, and so intrigued about, man, this is what people think the Colts are going to do. I agree with that, or I don't agree with that. But it was just really interesting, man. And as I continued to grow, through high school, Andrew Luck got drafted. Peyton Manning, got released, went to the Broncos. Andrew Luck got drafted. Remember, I actually went to that game with my dad. It was my senior year of high school, so it would have been 2013 when Peyton Manning returned to Lucas Oil. Man, that was one of my favorite moments of my life. Just able to see him there, and it's been a really cool journey. I started doing things now a number of years ago with one of my pals, Grant F. Seth. He now is fantastic. He does NBA analysis and stuff like that. We decided a couple of years ago, we're like, hey, we want to try to start our own sports network. So it was IndianaSportsCoverage.com. It's still, I think, up and running. I think Grant still does stuff on it. But I was just like, man, I would love to do this full time. And then I kind of got into the podcasting a couple of years ago. I remember 2017, I really was doing amateur podcasting, like the amateur of amateur podcasting. I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. I knew I wanted to talk about the Colts. And so that's kind of what when I started doing it. And then I really started like, hey, I want to actually like put out content regularly for Colts fans. And I remember my first episode putting on YouTube and Apple Podcasts, all that stuff, was the Colts AFC wildcard win last year against the Texans. That was my first one. And it's been a wild journey ever since, man.
Oh, wow.
It's been really good. Been able to do, things with my own like podcast and stuff like that. It's been really, really cool. And it's been really awesome to interact with people. And just people have been fantastic. And so I guess, man, to answer the last question here, what do I want to get out of this podcast and what do I want to give out of this podcast, man? I just want to give the best analysis that we can give. I want to always be, we're fans, but I want to be objective first. And I want to give opinions not based off of emotion, but I want to give opinions based off of fact. And I want to do things that give people inspiration, inspire people, man, to want to do this someday. Maybe because they heard one of our podcasts, maybe they're thinking, well, these guys can do it. Maybe we can do it too. Just some common guys that love the Colts and want to talk about it, want to give insight. And then that's just what I want to do. I just want to help people and help give right perspectives. And man, if we can inspire somebody to live out their dream, man, that's what I want to do with this podcast.
Yeah, man, I really enjoyed listening to that, man. Because one thing you said, when it talked about YouTube, that's how I started out when it came to talking about sports. Growing up, I always debated anyone and everyone. A buddy of mine, Zach Shackelford, he's actually getting into this draft right now, the center from Texas. I always used to debate with him over sports. Anyone and everyone, my coaches, my friends, my brother, my dad, it would get so intense too. But, I started thinking, I'm just like, wow, I invest a lot of time into sports. So after high school, I started a YouTube channel. I mostly just talked about the TCU Horned Frogs. And then, at this time last year, Cody, I can't even remember what I was doing. I remember just sitting at my parents' house, just going to work, coming back home, eating dinner. I can't really remember life at this time last year. And I remember listening to guys like Kevin Bowen, a friend of mine, Zach. And, I just started thinking, man, I want to do my own podcast. I started talking about the Dallas Mavericks, the TCU Horned Frogs, and I really just locked on to the Colts. You know, I still talk about the other two teams every here and there, but the Colts, man, that's where I just found out that's where my heart is. That's where my I feel like my blood is. And I do have a passion, a heart to do this, because the more and more I started doing my my podcast, the more I just realized, man, like there's so many people in this business industry that are just so nice, man. They welcome you with open arms. They give you advice anytime you want. And definitely piggybacking off what you said, inspiring people who think about wanting to do podcasting, no matter where you are in your life, no matter where you're at, struggling, riding high, whatever, man. You know, there's light at the end of that tunnel, and I feel like, you know, I'm starting to step into that light. And they can too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, speaking of Kevin Bowen, man, that was a big reason why I wanted to get into podcasting too. You know, I just listened to his podcast. I started when they started, I started listening. And so it's been really cool. And he's, you know, one of the guys that's really been fantastic and just helping me and trying to figure out what I want to do in the sports world. And, you know, and I just want to do that for other people. And I know you do too. And so it's just such a cool thing. It's such a unique opportunity to touch people's lives, people that we may never even meet. It's just such a cool thing to think about. Like we could be impacting somebody's life and we never talk to them in this life. And so it's just kind of cool to me.
It is cool, man. You know, that's, you know, I'd be a little remiss if I said this, but man, if there's anything anyone remembers about me, it's my mouth, man. That's one thing people seem to tell me. I've run into teachers that I had in middle school, high school, and they always tell me, man, I remember you had a mouth on you. And I'm just like, well, it hasn't changed yet, but man, I can't wait to get this thing started, man. I really can't wait. Well, switching gears here, man, you know, some things right now with this show, are you thinking about maybe specialty shows? Maybe doing like I said earlier, like a training camp special, like meeting up at training camp, doing something there for potentially a draft later down the line? What is some like special things that some podcasters think, aspire to, but don't exactly, just for any reason, don't do? What is something that you want to do together, man?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was really cool. I was able to go down to training camp last year. And I think it was such a unique opportunity going down to Grand Park, man. It's a beautiful place. And the cool thing is, like, really anybody with, you know, that does one of these things can go down there if you really put in the time and effort. And so, man, that's one thing that I want to do with this podcast is I want us to put in the extra effort. Maybe some people don't. And there's stuff that's there that you can do. It's just all about you put in the extra effort to do it. And so, you know, you talk about training camp, for example. I would love to do that. You know, I'd love to interview a player again. I was fortunate enough to interview Quincy Wilson last year. But love to interview a player again this year. Just do stuff like that. Be more out there. You know, just doing whatever, man. And I would love to just do unique stuff like that. You know, live from training camp, whatever it would be, man. I just want to do stuff, and I want to make sure that we're doing it on this podcast. You know, with the intention of, man, we want to do this better than anybody else, and not in a cocky way, not in a way that thinking we're better than other people, but, you know, we want to strive to be the best that we can be. And so that's what I want for this podcast. And I want to continue to improve and not settle and be like, this is good enough how we're doing it. I want us to continue to strive to be the best we can be. So that's really all, man. I don't have, I guess, specifics. I don't know if I completely answered your question there, but man, that's just my heart with this is like, I want to do things that people haven't done before.
Yeah, man, it would be so much better, dude, because, you know, that access, you can get into training camp, you know, it would be like, for me, take a flight or possibly drive there. For instance, like for TCU, I went to a TCU game. I met Gary Patterson. I was there as a fan. I wasn't there as a podcaster, but I met Gary Patterson. I met Jalen Reagor. I met Ty Summers, who's in the NFL now, plays for the Green Bay Packers. Caught up with my buddy Shaq again when they played Texas. You know, I've met some cool guys, and it's just cool to have, I guess you could say, a team close to you that you can connect with. You can get to know me, stuff like that, man. And I can definitely say Gary Patterson kind of scared me with the intensity in his eyes because it was literally right after a game, man. It kind of scared me. I felt like I was like a 4-year-old kid. I was like, hi, sir. I'm Michael. But I know, man. But he's a real good guy, man. Oh, man. But, man, dude, it's just sitting here thinking like, man, we're doing this together. And like you said, we're not trying to be cocky. We're not trying to do anything, that's about ourselves. That's
Right.
one thing where, we grow as people. And that's the biggest thing that I learned doing podcasting very early. And I can even say some people have a hard time learning that humbleness, that kindness. And, like going back to Kevin Bowen, I sent him, a message and, just thanked him for everything he did. He inspired me and everything. And I was just like, yeah, he's a busy guy. He won't get back to me. Literally 5 minutes later, he texted me back. And I was just like, oh, wow. It's just that kindness, just not trying to look down upon anybody. We want everyone to come to us. We want to be reliable. Like you said, we don't ever it was either me as a competitor in high school and me as a podcaster now. I don't want to settle for less because I know that we can push each other as partners of the show, and we can push Colts Nation to think outside the box. There's been some moments, in this 2019 season that really had me frustrated. Some of it, I sat back, thought about it, and others, I reacted in the moment. But, man, I can't wait to get the season started again. And that's where I'm making this next transition, man. Getting a little bit into content. It's the $1 million question. What do the Colts do at number 13?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? Lots of people have tried to speculate so far, and man, it's tough for me to say. I've heard so many different takes on this and so many different explanations on this. But if you're making me choose, I think you got to go quarterback, man. I think in this league, you live and you die by how good your quarterback is. We saw that in the Super Bowl. And I just think the Colts have to do it. I just think they have to pull the trigger, even if they sign, one of these older quarterbacks to teach one of these quarterbacks. Whatever they do, they got to address it in the draft. They got to find their future guy. And that's just my opinion. Lots of people have different opinions on whatever. But man, I think you live and you die by the quarterback, and I think if you got to do what you got to do to get the guy that you believe in.
Yeah, man, I was a little stubborn when it came to the quarterback position because even standing at 5-2, I was such a believer in Jacoby Brissett. If people want to do their homework on my Twitter history, go back and you can see that I was such a big supporter of his. But as the season started going down, I'm just like, something's not right. And people, they mentioned the injury, but an injury doesn't, make you not see a wide open tight end right in front of you unless you have a eye injury. And it's just
right.
like, man, something's missing. And like you said in the Super Bowl, man, when Patrick Mahomes threw the ball, you knew it was going to be something special. On that last bomb from Jimmy Garoppolo, I jumped up out of my couch for nothing. It literally landed like 10 yards in front of Emmanuel Sanders. I'm just like, that was a walk-in touchdown. And that's just the difference between a guy who is average, between a guy who you can rely on that can go and get it. And another thing when it comes to what do we do at pick 13, man, it's so hard right now in February to even answer that question when free agency hasn't even started yet. Because pass rushing, defensive tackle mainly, is a huge need. But say, right now, everybody's saying Javon Kinlaw to the Colts. Well, what if the Colts sign Chris Jones in free agency? Now you switch it. Maybe a wide receiver, but most likely 99.9% is going to be a quarterback now. It's just
Right.
like speculating, but to really give a true analysis answer, it's just so impossible to do it, man.
Yeah, it really is. It's so like, we've come out with a few mock drafts and stuff like that. This is really like based on stuff we don't know is going to happen. And that's just the big thing, man. Like free agency obviously dictates so much. The Colts really haven't been big quantity buyers in free agency. Like they signed some guys to some decent contracts, but they haven't been the guys that sign typically the big name free agents, the day one free agents. But if they do, man, you never know with this season what it holds, and so yeah, I just think it really depends on what route the Colts decide to go, whether they decide to sign some big name guys or whether they decide to kind of continue their approach to free agency. You never know, but yeah, it really dictates, man. You just don't know before free agency. It's just kind of a crapshoot at this point.
Man, speaking of free agency, Cody, let me ask you a question on Chris Ballard. Mm-hmm. Is this offseason the most important of his tenure thus far?
I would say so. I would say so because, he had Andrew Luck to fall back on. And that's not a knock on Chris Ballard by any means. But, I mean, he had an elite, so he could kind of do certain things and kind of get away with certain things because he had a quarterback that could, help you win a few games. And you even saw it. I mean, from 2018 to 2019, I would argue the Colts had a better team in 2019, and they still won, 4 less games or 3 less games?
Yeah.
So, Andrew Luck is that much better. I mean, he's 3 or 4 games difference. And so I think it is a really, really important offseason for him, probably the most important in his tenure, and I think this will really define how we look at Chris Ballard going forward. If he does draft his quarterback, is this the type of player that is Patrick Mahomes, or is this a Mitchell Trubisky type player? You just don't know what you're going to get. And so, yeah, I think to answer your question, I do think it is the most important offseason of Chris Ballard's tenure, and it should be. I mean, he couldn't help that Andrew Luck retired before the season, but now he has an entire offseason. Obviously, you can't just go and replace a top 5 quarterback in the league, but I think this is a big offseason for him, and he has the resources to do it, which I think is the most important thing.
Yeah, man, finding that guy that who is going to be a franchise guy, those are hard to find, man, unless you're 2-14 or 3-13. And I mean, you saw it with Deshaun Watson. He fell a little bit in the draft, but you knew Deshaun Watson was going to be a player. And then with Patrick Mahomes, Kansas City jumped up, 16 spots to get him? And, sometimes that's what you got to do. Now, I wouldn't say, Jordan Love, maybe Justin Herbert is not that guy yet, because a lot of what we hear is just the word potential, high ceiling. I would rather, Jordan Love could turn into Jameis Winston. He could turn into Marcus Mariota, or he could turn into Deshaun Watson. But without a doubt, this offseason, in my mind, is the most important because he needs to sign a player. I get it. I love listening to Chris Ballard. And he said it in his first press conference. They're going to build through the draft. But sometimes, man, you got to go out and get someone. The biggest thing for the Green Bay Packers turnaround are those 2 edge rushers that they signed. They were getting after guys. What did Zach Smith had? Preston Smith had like 12 sacks this season, right? That was a guy who Chris Ballard wanted, but it was a little bit pricey. And I remember a very reliable source said that it was between the Colts or the Packers for Preston Smith. That is a difference maker. Now, when that comes to Yannick Ngakoue or Chris Jones, those are the really only 2 marquee free agents that I can think of, because I'm out on Amari Cooper. What he's shown in Oakland, in Dallas, it's just not top wide receiver money, not top 3 wide receiver money. I'm out. Byron Jones, no, Philly can have him. Brandon Scherf from Washington, maybe Chris Ballard can work some magic with that. Sign him, trade Mark Glowinski maybe for another pick, and maybe, hey, you could use that as ammo to potentially trade up. Because I like Tua Tagovailoa, but I'm not sure if I'm the only one that thinks this. You can help me out on this, Cody, but I like the idea of Tua in a Colts uniform, but I do not like that injury history. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's just the dangerous game you play, man. Like, it's kind of weird to think about it. I mean, I saw reports today that everything looks okay. Like his hip looks all right. It looks very good, but it's just scary. It's always scary for me to draft a player like that. But certainly the potential's there. So if you believe that he's healthy, if the medical clears out, man, I think you got to do what you got to do. If you fall in love with a player, you got to do it. But it's just, that's just kind of the NFL sometimes, man. Like you look at a guy like Frank Gore, even a guy that tore his ACL in college and then goes on to have a career where he's barely injured for his entire career. And so you just don't know. You just have no idea sometimes. And that's just kind of the nature of the game. Sometimes freak things happen. But, man, I just think that if the Colts really fall in love with Tua, they got to go up and they got to make it. They got to do something. I know that Chris Ballard loves his picks. He said that in his press conference before, but things are different now. You don't have a star quarterback just sitting in your back pocket. Like, you got to do some things this offseason. You have the resources and draft picks. You have the money. You got to do things. You got to start doing things. And I think that Chris Ballard recognizes that. I remember in his, season-ending presser, he was upset with himself because he didn't feel like he gave his team enough, things to win, enough pieces to win. And so it makes sense to me because, you have Andrew Luck and you think, we might have to pay Andrew Luck again. And it makes more sense. But, now you don't have Andrew Luck. Now your flaws are amplified because you don't have that star quarterback that can win you 10, 11 games every season. You got to really, I guess, sorry, I got tongue-tied there. What I'm trying to say is basically your margin of error is a lot less now. And that's something that I've said from the beginning of the season to now. You can't go out there, and we even saw it, man, in the Colts season. Like, their wins were a touchdown or less most of the time beyond, 2 outlier games, and most of their losses were one-score games as well. And so I think that shows, man, what you're missing is you're missing an elite, quarterback and a good passing game. And I think that's what puts you over the edge to be, around 500 team to a playoff Super Bowl contender. I really do. And so that's just kind of where I stand on it. But, certainly if there's a guy like Tua sitting there and you believe in him and you believe that, it was just kind of a weird thing that happened, freak injury, man, you got to go for
it. Yeah. I mean, it's the draft, man. So many things can happen. I mean, people are throwing scenarios at me left and right that are always, they say, a for sure thing. And I'm just like, look, I've been paying attention to the draft for quite a while. And there are a lot of shockers in the draft. Remember last year, DK Metcalf was supposed to be a top 10 pick. He lasted until the late second round. And then in 2017 with Malik Hooker, he was slated to be a top 5 pick. He fell to number 15. That's just how sometimes the board falls. That's how, certain teams make the call, and you're starting to look at that top heavy of the draft, and you're saying, man, there's a lot of teams that could be taking quarterback. Carolina, we still don't know what they want to do, but it came out today. Phillip Rivers and the Chargers are officially going separate ways. Miami needs a guy. I wouldn't be surprised if Detroit took a guy and traded Matthew Stafford somewhere else. You already know what Cincinnati Bengals are going to do. You know who they're going to take. And, I just think other than quarterback, you also need to sign some elite guys. I love me some Pierre Desir. I love me some Mark Glowinski. I love me some, Justin Houston, Marcus Hunt. But these guys, they're not the true difference makers. And Justin Houston's not 26 anymore, getting 19 sacks. He's, 31 now? We need a young guy in Yannick Ngakoue or, maybe Vic Beasley. I'm intrigued by him, but you need some elite playmakers, at wide receiver, pass rusher, quarterback, and that's what the Colts are missing. And remember, Chris Ballard said it at his press conference at the end of the year. To tell the guys that there won't be turnover this offseason would be dishonest with them. And that's the number one thing I took from his press conference, is that he's going to go after some guys. I certainly hope he will as we inch closer and closer. Right now it's kind of the dead period, but I'm pretty sure at the end of February, early March, we're going to start hearing about the Colts linked to some guys. But, I mean, when you have $86 million, you're always going to be linked to everybody. But realistic guys, man, Chris Jones, Yannick Ngakoue, those are the two guys that I can't get out of my head. When it comes to tight end, you look at Austin Hooper, Hunter Henry. I'm pretty sure Atlanta's going to franchise tag Austin Hooper. Hunter Henry, oh, man, that injury history, man, that scares me again. But I do think this is a good draft class. And even if you wanted to sign Hunter Henry, this is a good draft class to draft another tight end. If that's an Albert O in the 4th round, Jared Pinkney, Thaddeus Moss, Hunter Bryant. I really love me some Bryson Hopkins. But, pass catchers are a definite need. Injuries just ruined this season. T.Y. Hilton, Paris Campbell, Devin Funchess. I'm not sure if you heard, but it didn't sound too confident from Chris Ballard that Devin Funchess wants to return to Indianapolis. I don't know. Right. There's a gray cloud around that. So getting pass catchers, helping out JB or Anthony Gordon, Jordan Love, whoever it may concern. This is definitely the biggest offseason for Chris Ballard, because we all know what kind of owner Jim Irsay is. I think he learned from Chuck Pagano and Ryan Grigson, and he doesn't want any mediocrity in Indianapolis anymore.
Right, for sure. Yeah, and the big thing is just getting some of that premier talent at the premier positions, quarterback, pass rusher, those type of positions. That's just something the Colts don't have, and I think that's a big reason, man, why they're sitting here at 7-9, and why Houston, while the Colts may have an overall better 53-man roster than Houston has some guys. They have some elite playmakers at the key positions that you need, and that's the big reason why they were in the playoffs and the Colts are sitting at home. And so I definitely agree with you, man. I think the Colts have a shot. They need to do some things. Like you said, they need to address some positions. Yeah, some guys you could re-sign, but you got that money. You got to spend it. You got to do something.
Yeah.
And so, hopefully Chris does something with it, but.
Yeah, we know an extension for Marlon Mack is coming, and like you said, premier talent at premier positions. I believe we got a guy at Darius Leonard. He's a difference maker, and you got an elite talent at Quentin Nelson, but Quentin Nelson's not throwing the football. He's not catching the football. He's not making tackles. Don't get me wrong. He is an elite talent, but we need to add, like you said, elite talent at the premier positions. So that's one thing I'm excited to see what Chris Ballard and the Colts do. I can't wait, man. I'm looking at the free agent class. I see some good names, some underrated names, and then I'm just looking at this draft class and I'm thinking, holy hell, this draft class is deep. So I don't think I have too much left unless you have anything else you want to talk about, Cody.
No. I think this was a good pilot episode. I think we introduced ourselves a little bit, kind of what we want to do, and just kind of talked a little bit of Colts. I didn't know how much we'd get in today, but I think we kind of addressed some of the stuff that is going to be big storylines, in this offseason and 2020 season. And so, yeah, man, I think overall we kind of touched what we wanted to touch, and this is going to be a weekly podcast. So we'll, I don't know when this is going to officially be published and go out, but, we'll have one again next week for you guys, and hopefully we'll continue to do that as off-season progresses, as free agency, gets closer, and as the draft approaches. We want to provide the best content we can. So, yeah.
All right, man. Well, I believe that'll bring this show to a close. For future episodes, guys, we're going to have draft position rankings. We're going to look at free agent class, positions, premier players, underrated players, players the Colts might want to stay away from. And, it's a good time in the offseason to start getting some notes ready to go. So he is Cody Felger. I am Michael Terrazas. Thank you for tuning into the first episode of the Colts Brawl podcast. I'm saying goodbye to you guys until next week, and y'all have a blessed week.